Hi everyone, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm really happy you're here. Tonight, we're going to go on a calm and quiet trip to learn something amazing. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's enjoy this peaceful science story together. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? If you like relaxing science videos, don't forget to tap the like button. Now let's begin. There is a quiet place behind your eyes where lightning moves without sound. This is not the kind of lightning that splits trees or burns skies, but something softer, like the flicker of a candle behind the wind. It travels not in storms, but in thoughts, in moments, in feelings. This is where emotion begins, in the soft electricity of feeling. If you sit very still, you may feel something stir inside you. Not on your skin, but beneath it, in a place words don't always reach. Perhaps it is the glow of comfort when you hear a friend's voice, or the slow ache of a memory you cannot hold. Perhaps it's the sudden bloom of laughter, the sting of embarrassment, or the hush that falls when sadness drapes itself across your chest. Whatever it is, your brain does not just understand these things, it feels them. Inside your brain are cells shaped like stars. They are called neurons, and each one can speak, but they do not use voices. They speak in signals, in pulses, in electric whispers passed from one to the next. These signals are not random, they are precise, delicate, and full of meaning. And when you feel an emotion, any emotion, it is because these little star-shaped cells are lighting up in patterns your body has learned over a lifetime. Imagine a neuron as a tiny firefly waiting in the dusk. When it's time to speak, it glows. That glow passes to the next firefly, and then the next, until 1,000 tiny lights ripple across the night. This is how a feeling travels through your brain. It begins in one place, then spreads outward, weaving through different regions like a thread of gold. One of these places is the amygdala, a small almond-shaped cluster tucked deep within the brain. It is one of the first to respond when something emotional happens. The amygdala does not think in words, it feels in signals. If you are frightened, it sparks quickly, sending alerts through your body like the ringing of a bell. If you are happy, it glows more gently, like a sunbeam slipping across your face. But the amygdala does not act alone. Nearby is the hippocampus, which holds your memories close. When you feel something strongly, the hippocampus tries to remember it. That is why certain moments, even small ones, stay with us forever. Not because they were loud, but because they made us feel deeply. A smell, a sound, a song from childhood. These become keys that unlock hidden feelings, carried by the hippocampus like pages in a diary. Above them sits the prefrontal cortex, the place where reason lives. It is slower, quieter, and thoughtful. It doesn't feel emotions first, but it tries to understand them. When you reflect on your sadness, when you try to calm your anger, or choose not to cry, this is the part of your brain that speaks, doesn't silence emotion. It listens to it and helps you decide what to do next. In this way, your brain is like a garden of soft wires and quiet lights, each part tuned to a different feeling. The signals between them are carried not just by electricity, but by chemicals too. These are called neurotransmitters, and they shape what the electricity means. If electricity is the messenger, the neurotransmitter is the emotion itself. Dopamine brings reward and pleasure. It's the shimmer of joy when something good happens. Serotonin is steadier, a tide that keeps your mood afloat. Oxytocin is warmth and connection, the feeling of holding someone's hand. And cortisol is the weight of stress, the signal that something needs attention. These chemicals do not move randomly. They are released in moments, in doses, in response to what you see, hear, remember, or imagine. A hug, a sound, a word, they can all change your brain's chemistry in seconds, just as rain changes the smell of the earth. And yet emotions are not just in the brain. Your body listens too. When fear arrives, your heart races. When grief visits, your chest tightens. When love blooms, your stomach dances. These are not tricks of the mind. They are signals sent down through the autonomic nervous system, reaching your chest, your breath, your muscles. Your brain does not just feel emotion. It sends it out like a wave. This wave travels through the vagus nerve, a long, winding highway that connects your brain to your heart, lungs, and gut. Some scientists call it the body's emotional superhighway. When you cry, when you blush, when you sigh, that is the vagus nerve speaking. It listens to your emotions and answers with touch, with rhythm, with breath. In this way, emotions become physical. They are not only thoughts, they are movements, they are pressure and softness, tension and release. They are moments that ripple through your cells like music. You don't just think them, you live them. And yet, emotions are never simple. Joy can be mixed with sorrow. Fear can sit beside excitement. Love can ache. These mixed feelings are not confusion, they are a richness. They show that your brain does not feel in black and white, but in colour, in shades, in layers. Each feeling is a blend of signals and chemicals, of memories and meanings built from a lifetime of learning what it is to be alive. Some scientists believe that even babies in the womb can begin to feel. Not in the way adults do, but in pulses of calm and stress, in the rhythm of a mother's voice, the quiet of a heartbeat. These first feelings are like whispers in the dark, shaping the brain before words ever come. Others wonder if emotions began long before humans, in animals, in early mammals, even in creatures that do not speak. A dog that waits by the door, a bird that sings when it sees the sun, a whale that grieves. The brain has been feeling longer than it has been thinking. So the next time you feel something rise in you, a flicker of peace, a swell of sorrow, a burst of joy, remember this. It is not just a passing mood. It is a conversation inside you, a spark between cells, a message from your body to your brain and back again. It is a song of chemicals, a dance of electricity, a hush of meaning. The soft electricity of feeling is not a machine. It is not a switch you can flip. It is a living thing, made of you, shaped by you, always changing, always flowing. And like a candle in a quiet room, it glows, not to be seen by others, but to remind you that you are here, you are real, and you are deeply, wonderfully alive. Let's drift deeper now into the invisible dance between memory and feeling, where your brain begins to layer the present with all that came before. Every emotion you feel carries a past with it. Small echoes, soft reminders, old fingerprints left behind by time. The brain, though made of tissue and sparks, remembers in feelings just as much as in facts. And sometimes those feelings arrive before the facts do. You might hear a song and feel your chest tighten, not knowing why. Or smell something familiar and be filled with comfort or sorrow or longing. That is your hippocampus reaching out with quiet hands, searching its shelves for a match. It's not pulling up numbers or names, it's retrieving a feeling. Because the hippocampus doesn't just record memories, it breathes life into them, it pairs them with emotion, so that when they return, they arrive like visitors with stories to tell. All around the hippocampus are threads of connection, links to the amygdala, to the prefrontal cortex, to the sensory regions that carry sight, sound, smell and touch. When you remember a birthday cake, you might also remember laughter. When you recall the ocean, you might feel loneliness or peace. These feelings are not added later. They are part of the memory itself, fused in place by the brain's own chemistry. That fusion begins with repetition. When an emotion is felt strongly and often, the brain strengthens the connections that made it. It builds tiny bridges between neurons, weaving thicker paths with every revisit. This is called long-term potentiation, a quiet sculpting of the brain itself. The more something is felt, the more easily it returns. That's why joy can become a refuge and sorrow can become a shadow. The brain remembers what matters most, and still it does not store these things in a single drawer. Emotion flows between regions, like light through stained glass. It changes depending on where it lands. The insula, for example, is a small but deeply sensitive part of the brain that helps you notice your body's inner world. It listens for your heartbeat, your breath, your stomach's quiet churn, and in doing so it tells you how you feel. That flutter in your chest, that ache in your belly, that sense of unease or warmth or tightness. The insula helps turn those signals into knowing, I am anxious, I am calm, I am okay. Farther up, the anterior cingulate cortex works like a balancing beam. It watches for conflict between what you expect and what you feel. When something doesn't make sense, when you smile but feel hollow, or when someone you trust causes pain, this region lights up. It doesn't judge, but it pays attention. It's your inner observer, always checking, always sensing. And there is more. There's default mode network, a constellation of brain regions that hums when you're daydreaming, when your mind drifts into the past or imagines the future. This network is like a quiet river of self. It's where your thoughts wander when you're not focused on anything in particular. Here, emotions become story. Here, the mind turns experience into narrative. It asks not only what happened, but what it meant. This is why when we feel something deeply, we often begin to think in stories. We remember not just what someone said, but how it made us feel. We imagine not just a future event, but how it might make us hurt or heal. The default mode network wraps feeling in language and picture and memory. It lets us replay the past and rehearse the future. It lets us feel something twice, once in the moment and again in the mind. But sometimes the stories become tangled. When trauma enters the brain, when something overwhelming or painful happens, it can etch itself in deeper ways. The amygdala becomes more sensitive. The hippocampus may struggle to sort time. The brain begins to replay the memory not as a past event, but as a living thing. Fear becomes ever present. Safety feels out of reach. In these moments, the brain is not broken. It is trying to protect. But its signals are too loud, too constant. Therapies that help the brain heal, like deep breathing, safe touch, mindful focus, don't erase emotion. They help the brain rewire its response. They calm the amygdala, strengthen the prefrontal cortex, and allow the hippocampus to place the memory gently in the past. Healing is not forgetting. It's learning to feel differently. And as we learn, our emotions shift. A feeling once filled with fear may become softened by understanding. A memory once sharp with pain may fade into tenderness. The brain is always changing. Neuroplasticity, the ability of neurons to form new paths, is what allows you to grow. It allows a person who once lived in sadness to find joy again. It allows us to love after loss, to trust after fear. Even imagination plays a role. When you imagine kindness, when you picture peace, your brain lights up as if it were real. The mirror neurons, those cells that help you feel what others feel, are activated not only by watching but by imagining. They are the quiet artists of empathy. And in their art, they remind us that the emotions are shared, that what you feel is part of a larger pattern, echoed in others, felt across time. So much of this happens without words. Long before you say, "I'm happy" or "I'm afraid," your body has already whispered it. Your pupils have widened, your shoulders have lifted, your skin has changed temperature. The brain has sent messages through the bloodstream, through nerves, through hormones, telling every part of you something is happening. And only after this orchestra begins do we name the feeling. Names help us understand, but feelings do not always need names. Some are too soft, too mixed, too wild. Some simply arrive and pass through like wind through trees, felt but unseen, heard but not held. The brain does not need labels to feel, it only needs time and space and silence. And so emotions live in that space between memory and imagination, between body and brain, between electricity and chemistry. They are not errors, they are not distractions, they are data, gentle, complicated data about the world and your place in it. Your brain is not a machine that produces emotion. It is a landscape alive with hills and rivers, lit by fireflies, touched by weather. Some days are storms, some days are sunlight, but every part is part of you, and every emotion, no matter how small or strange or sudden, is a signal from that landscape. A soft reminder. You're alive, you're sensing, you're learning even now. Let it be okay to feel, let it be okay to not understand. The brain will continue to learn the language of feeling, one spark at a time, one quiet moment at a time. And in that learning, in that slow becoming, something beautiful is happening. You're becoming more yourself, more whole, more here. Now imagine the final stretch of this quiet journey. The place where emotion doesn't just pass through you, but begins to shape who you are. Over time, feelings become more than responses. They become part of your story, your personality, your way of being in the world. And though the brain holds many things, thoughts, language, logic, it is emotion that gives those things meaning. When a child learns the word tree, it becomes more than a shape with leaves. It becomes the feeling of sitting beneath it on a hot day, the scent of bark, the way sunlight filters through the branches. Emotion wraps around meaning like roots around soil. anchoring every idea in feeling. Without emotion, knowledge floats. With it, knowledge becomes alive. This is why you remember moments that moved you more than those that did not. The brain does not highlight dates or details unless they come with feeling. Emotion is the ink that writes memory deeper. And it doesn't just mark the past, it guides the future. Every decision you make is touched by emotion, even the quiet ones. What to say, who to trust, when to pause, what to pursue. Your thoughts are shaped by feeling, even when you don't notice. And beneath it all, your sense of self begins to form, not just as a collection of thoughts, but as a feeling you carry with you. That inner warmth when you do something kind, that ache when you make a mistake, that spark of connection when someone understands you. These are not accidents. They are your brain's way of saying, this is who I am, this matters to me. Emotion connects us, not only to ourselves, but to others. When you see someone cry, your brain responds as if you were crying too. When you hear laughter, your own neurons light up in rhythm. This is called resonance. It is the deep, silent music of empathy, the way our brains play in harmony even when we do not speak. And this harmony is not just human. Across the animal world, we see echoes of feeling. Elephants mourn their dead. Dolphins protect one another. Primates console. These behaviors may look different, but beneath them is the same electric thread. Signals of care, of fear, of loss, of joy. Emotion may be one of the oldest languages on Earth, written in brain and body, in gesture and gaze, long before words came to explain it. Yet for all its universality, emotion is also uniquely yours. No one else feels exactly as you do. Your brain, shaped by your life, your memories, your biology, experiences the world in its own quiet way, and that is a kind of beauty, that within each mind is a world, glowing softly, feeling deeply, changing constantly. Over time, this world grows more complex. As the brain matures, it becomes better at noticing subtle emotions, at understanding others, at regulating itself. But even as the circuits refine and the chemicals shift, the heart of it remains the same, the desire to connect, to feel, to belong. Sometimes that desire is hidden under layers of numbness, of distraction, of fear, but it never disappears. The emotional brain is always listening. It listens when you dream. It listens when you walk beneath trees. It listens in the silence after laughter. And when it hears something true, a word, a song, a memory, it answers, often with no sound at all, just a feeling deep in your chest. To understand emotion is not to master it, but to meet it gently, to allow space for it, to learn its patterns without judgment. Some days will be heavy, others will be bright, but in each day, emotion offers a map, not to what is outside, but to what is within. And as you follow that map, you begin to understand something simple and profound. You are not your feelings, but you are not separate from them either. They pass through you like weather, but they also help shape the landscape of your mind. And just like weather, they are never still. They move, they soften, they return in new forms. In this movement is your humanity, in this electricity your softness, in these chemical messengers your strength. The brain, that quiet forest of light and shadow, is always growing, and every emotion, whether tender, painful, joyful or quiet, is a sign that your brain is alive, aware, and deeply connected to the mystery of being human. So the next time you feel a surge in your chest, a tightening in your throat, a warmth behind your eyes, pause, notice it. That is your brain speaking in its oldest language, a language made not of letters, but of pulses, of patterns, of presence, a language that says, without words, you are here, you are feeling, you are alive. And in that moment, with nothing else changing, you are part of something larger, a living, breathing story of emotion that stretches back through the history of life itself, a story written not in books, but in sparks and sighs and silence, a story only your brain could feel exactly this way. This is the soft electricity of feeling. It doesn't rush, it doesn't demand, it simply glows, quietly, steadily, like the light of a thought that matters, like the warmth of a memory returning, like the truth of being alive, whispered gently inside your mind. Some emotions speak loudly, but sadness often arrives like a shadow at dusk, slowly, quietly, almost without being noticed. It doesn't crash or demand. It lingers. It rests in the corners of thought, in the hush between breaths, in the pause that follows something lost. And somewhere inside the mind it waits, not to harm, but to remind. Sadness does not come to break us. It comes to tell us something has changed. In the folds of the brain, there are places that listen for this change. One is the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, a small deep region often linked to the feeling of despair. When sadness stays too long, this area glows more brightly than usual. It becomes overactive, not because the brain is weak, but because it is trying to make sense of sorrow. It is trying to understand what has been lost, what has shifted, what cannot be returned. Sadness is not a failure. It is a signal that something mattered, that someone was loved, that a dream once felt real. When we feel sad, our brains are not broken. They are responding honestly to the weight of the world. In this way, sadness is a form of honesty. It tells the truth our words sometimes hide, and the brain listens in many ways. The amygdala, already sensitive to emotion, becomes even more alert when sadness rises. It sharpens the feeling, lets us feel it deeply. This helps us pay attention, to reflect, to grieve, and often to change. So joy speaks in many languages, in dopamine and oxytocin, in movement and memory, in breath and light, but always begins between neurons, tiny glowing messengers whispering to one another across silent spaces. And in those spaces, a whole world of feeling blooms. You don't need a reason to feel joy. Sometimes the brain creates it in response to nothing at all, the way the wind feels on your skin, the shape of clouds, the hush of early morning. These moments, small and unnoticed, are where joy hides, and the more we notice them, the more joy learns to return. Because the brain is always listening, always shaping, always waiting for a reason to light up. And sometimes that reason is as simple as being here, in this moment, with no demand other than to feel what is real. Let us follow the pulse of joy as it deepens through the layers of the brain, weaving its language not just across moments of delight, but through the deeper, quieter spaces where joy takes root. The brain does not only feel joy in reaction to something bright or surprising, it also learns to grow joy from within, to build it, nurture it, and return to it again and again, like a well-worn path through a quiet garden. As joy becomes more familiar, the brain strengthens the connections that support it. Neurons that fire together, wire together, this is the core idea of neuroplasticity. When joy is felt repeatedly, when kindness is noticed, when gratitude is practiced, the synapses involved in those emotions grow stronger. The path becomes smoother. The signal travels faster. The emotion becomes more easily reached. This process is most visible in the medial prefrontal cortex, a region of the brain that helps us reflect on ourselves, our experiences, and our values. This is the place where meaning is made, not through logic alone, but through emotional insight. It is here that joy becomes something more than pleasure. It becomes purpose. For example, when you help someone, a small burst of dopamine may follow. But in the medial prefrontal cortex, that burst is reflected upon. It is stored not only as, "that felt good," but as "that matters to me." And with repetition, this connection deepens. Altruism becomes a source of lasting joy, not because it always feels exciting, but because it aligns with who you are. The brain remembers what it feels like to be kind, to be useful, to be part of something larger. This memory is reinforced by another structure, the anterior cingulate cortex, which plays a role in emotion regulation and empathy. It helps bridge the space between noticing emotion and responding to it. When we feel joy, especially shared joy, this region becomes active. It links feeling to understanding. It tells us not only that we are happy, but why. Meanwhile, the striatum, especially the nucleus accumbens, responds to the timing of rewards. It notices when joy arrives as expected and when it comes as a surprise. Unexpected joy often triggers a larger dopamine release. But even predicted joy, the soft anticipation of something good, begins to light up this region. This is why looking forward to something can feel almost as rewarding as the event itself. The brain enjoys joy twice, in its becoming and in its arrival. Yet joy does not exist only in the individual. The brain is inherently social, and much of its architecture is built around connection. The superior temporal sulcus, the temporoparietal junction, and the fusiform gyrus are all involved in interpreting faces, voices, gestures. When we see someone else smile, these areas activate. We do not just observe, we join. Joy becomes shared. This sharing is amplified by oxytocin. When we feel safe with others, when trust is present, oxytocin levels rise, creating a sense of warmth and closeness. Over time, the brain begins to associate certain people with safety and joy. Just thinking of them can trigger the release of these chemicals. This is the quiet magic of attachment, the way joy becomes woven into the presence of another. And in long-term relationships, between parent and child, between partners, between close friends, the orbitofrontal cortex plays a role. This region helps us evaluate rewards in a social context. It tells us which connections are safe, fulfilling, worth returning to. When this region is active, joy becomes tethered not just to events, but to people, to faces, to voices, to places where laughter once echoed. Joy can also be cultivated through attention. The lateral prefrontal cortex, which helps with focus and control, allows us to guide our awareness. When we intentionally look for beauty, for goodness, for lightness, we activate this region. And with practice, we train the brain to lean toward joy, to notice what is right even in the presence of what is wrong. This noticing is not a denial of difficulty, it is a skill, a choice to allow joy its place, even among pain. The brain can hold both sorrow and wonder, fatigue and delight. In fact, when it does, joy becomes more durable. It is not erased by hardship, it grows around it, through it, because of it. Even the default mode network, which often wanders into memory and the imagination, plays a role in joy. When we daydream of places we love, people we miss, futures we hope for, this network becomes active. And while it can carry sadness, it also carries joy. The joy of what has been and what might be again. It allows us to feel joy through time, to stretch it across past and future. And so joy, though often quiet, is never still. It travels, it lingers, it deepens, it echoes through layers of brain and body, shaping the way we see ourselves, others, and the world. It tells us not only that we are feeling, but that we are growing, that we are capable of creating beauty in the middle of ordinary moments. This is why rituals matter, small practices that return the brain to joy. A walk at dusk, a cup of tea, a song played softly in the morning. These are not luxuries. They are anchors. They remind the brain where joy lives. They help joy return more easily. Because the truth is, joy is not rare. It is not hidden in distant places or reserved for special people. It is built into the brain. It lives in every cell that listens for meaning, every circuit that responds to beauty, every neuron that reaches toward another. The more we follow it, the more we find it, not as a peak, but as a path. And on this path, joy speaks in whispers, in pulses, in gentle, glowing signals that say again and again, "This matters, this moment is enough, you're alive, and that is a wonder." Now let's bring this story to a close, not by ending joy, but by letting it settle gently into the folds of memory and meaning, like the last note of a song that still hums in the heart long after the music fades. Joy does not disappear when the moment ends. It becomes part of the brain's rhythm, a thread woven into how we feel, how we remember, and how we live. As joy is experienced again and again, the brain begins to change. Structures once dim become more active. Connections that once flickered with hesitation now glow more steadily. The language of joy, once soft and rare, becomes easier to hear. The brain begins to recognize what brings peace, what brings purpose, what feels like home. One of the most beautiful effects of repeated joy is the way it reshapes the hippocampus. This region, so central to memory, grows stronger in environments where positive emotion is present. It becomes more active, more connected. Studies have shown that joy, gratitude, and calm reflection can even increase the volume of the hippocampus over time. The mind doesn't just feel better, it becomes more resilient, more able to hold and organize the story of your life. And in that story, joy plays many roles. It is not only laughter and delight, it is also stillness, relief, hope. It is the feeling of waking after a long sleep and remembering something beautiful. It is the peace that comes after tears, the moment you feel like yourself again. The prefrontal cortex, always quietly watching, begins to shift too. It becomes more flexible, more creative. Joy gives it room to explore, to imagine, to solve problems not just with logic but with openness. This is why children learn best through play, not because the information is simpler, but because joy creates the safest space for growth. As we age, this ability to find joy becomes more valuable, not less. In fact, research shows that older adults often report higher levels of emotional satisfaction, not because life becomes easier, but because the brain becomes better at noticing what matters, the noise softens, the signal becomes clearer. Part of this clarity comes from the default mode network, which begins to tell a different kind of story. Instead of wandering into fear or regret, it begins to dwell on gratitude, on purpose, on love. This is not automatic. It is built moment by moment through repeated acts of noticing. The way sunlight hits a wall, the sound of leaves in the wind, the softness in someone's voice. Even the body responds. When joy is felt, the parasympathetic nervous system becomes more active. Heart rate slows, muscles relax, digestion improves, the breath deepens. The body enters a state called rest and digest, the opposite of fight or flight. It is here in this calm state that healing happens, that the body repairs, that the mind resets. And this reset allows us to return to the world with more presence, more softness, more strength. Joy doesn't make us ignore pain. It gives us the energy to hold it, to move through it, to reach for others even when we're hurting. In this way, joy becomes a source of courage. This is why even in dark times, moments of joy matter. They are not distractions. They are reminders. They tell the brain, the world is still beautiful. You're still capable of feeling. There is still light, even here. Sometimes joy arrives quietly, not as a rush, but as a whisper. The joy of breathing deeply. The joy of being still. The joy of knowing you are enough. These moments may seem small, but the brain remembers them. It saves them. It returns to them when it needs strength. This is how joy becomes a resource, not something to chase, but something to return to. It lives in the neural patterns you've built through every act of kindness, every moment of gratitude, every choice to see beauty, even when it's hard. These choices matter. They shape the very way your brain responds to the world. And over time, this response becomes a way of being. Not a constant smile, not endless positivity, but a quiet readiness to feel wonder, to welcome laughter, to see goodness, even in ordinary things. This is the language of joy between neurons, a language the brain never forgets, even when we do. It's why the brain responds so powerfully to music, to rhythm, to harmony. These sounds speak the same language joy does: vibration, pattern, movement. They bypass thought and go straight to feeling. They remind the nervous system how to dance, how to rest, how to remember. Even silence, when felt with presence, can bring joy, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of peace, the quiet between thoughts, the pause between breaths. The moment you realize nothing more is needed, that you are whole right now. In this final place, the brain does not ask for more. It simply listens. It glows. It rests in the soft signal of joy, knowing that this too is part of what it means to be alive. And so joy continues, not as a destination, but as a companion. It lives in the spaces between neurons, in the breath between moments, in the light that fills the mind when you remember who you are. It is always there, waiting to be noticed. Not loud, not urgent, just steady, just real, just yours. There is a gentle space in the brain where time folds and feelings bloom, a space where memory does not sit like a photograph but moves like a song. Here, past and present blend, and what was once only a moment becomes something deeper, a feeling. A memory that becomes emotion is no longer just a picture. It is warmth, ache, longing, joy. It breathes. The mind does not remember in perfect lines. It remembers in sensations, in fragments. in colour and sound and the way your stomach turned when someone called your name. Memory begins not with dates or details, but with feeling. And deep inside the brain, the work of turning experience into emotion begins with two small, powerful structures, the hippocampus and the amygdala. The hippocampus is the quiet librarian of your brain. It collects your days, organizes them, places them on invisible shelves. It remembers the shape of your childhood bedroom, the way your mother's hands moved, the scent of rain on your first day of school. It writes your life in gentle layers, not as facts, but as stories. Right beside it sits the amygdala, a sentinel, a spark. It listens for emotion, for intensity. It does not remember the layout of a room, but it remembers how it felt to be in that room when your heart was racing. It marks memories with meaning. When something matters, when it hurts or thrills or soothes, the amygdala signals, "This is important. Remember this." Together, the hippocampus and amygdala turn experience into feeling. They speak to each other constantly. One provides the structure, the other provides the fire, and through this exchange, memory becomes more than a record. It becomes part of how you feel the world. You might not recall the exact moment you fell in love, but you remember the feeling. The tilt of light, the sound of laughter, the way time slowed. That memory, stored in both image and sensation, becomes part of your emotional landscape. It shapes how you feel now, and sometimes without warning it returns, not as thought, but as emotion. This is why music can make you cry. A few notes and suddenly your chest tightens. You're not thinking of the past, or you're feeling it. Somewhere deep inside, the hippocampus has recognized the melody, and the amygdala has answered. A quiet circuit lights up, and the past becomes present. Smell works this way too. The olfactory bulb, which processes scent, has direct connections to both the hippocampus and amygdala. No translation is needed. The smell of baking bread, of old books, of someone's shirt, these don't remind you of things, they return you to them. And in doing so, they awaken emotion. This is not nostalgia alone, it is biological. The brain stores memory not in one place, but across a network: vision, sound, sensation, emotion. When any piece is triggered, the others begin to stir. A memory is not a file, it is a constellation. And when the right star is touched, the whole sky lights up. But not all memories are warm. Some return with a shiver. A sound, a word, a place can bring back fear or grief or shame. The amygdala does not judge. It only marks what was intense. And when something painful happens, it marks it strongly. Sometimes too strongly. The memory loops. The feeling returns before the thought. This is why healing takes time. The brain must learn to refile those memories, to place them gently in the past. It must let the hippocampus say, "That moment is over," and let the prefrontal cortex help shape a new response. This is not erasing. It is updating. Rewriting the feeling even if the fact stays the same. And as this happens, something quiet begins to grow, wisdom. When we feel our memories, when we sit with them, listen to them, learn from them, they begin to soften. A moment of shame becomes a lesson. A moment of grief becomes a thread of compassion. The feeling shifts, not into joy, but into understanding. Even dreaming plays a role. During REM sleep, the brain reactivates emotional memories. The hippocampus and amygdala replay old experiences, sometimes with strange combinations, a person from your past in a new place, a moment from long ago slightly changed. These are not random, they are rehearsals. The brain, while you sleep, is processing what it still holds. Sometimes a dream brings back a forgotten feeling. Sometimes it helps you let one go. The emotional charge of a memory fades through repetition, through sleep, through time. This is how healing hides in the ordinary, in rest, in remembering, in simply being alive another day. The vincula also plays a part. It helps the brain feel the body, heartbeat, breath, muscle tension, and links those physical states to emotional meaning. A memory of safety might come with warmth in the chest. A memory of loss with heaviness in the gut. These sensations are not secondary. They are the emotion itself returned to you through the body. And in all of this, the brain is not just holding the past. It is using it to guide, to shape, to prepare. The way you respond today is shaped by every feeling you've ever carried. Memory becomes emotion, and emotion becomes choice. So when a moment feels larger than it should, when a simple word brings tears, or a quiet scene floods you with feeling, trust the brain's wisdom. It is not confusion, it is memory becoming emotion. It is the past knocking gently, not to haunt, but to remind. You've felt deeply before, you're feeling again, and that means you're alive. Let's drift deeper into this quiet exchange, this place where memory and emotion pass their signals through the unseen circuits of the brain. Here, the past is not something we leave behind. It is something we carry, often without knowing. The brain is not simply a recorder of what happened. It is a sculptor, shaping your feelings each time a memory rises. Each time you recall a memory, the hippocampus opens the neural file, but it does not play back an untouched recording. Instead, the brain rewrites the moment slightly. It colours the edges with how you feel now. It filters the old emotion through today's state of mind. This is called memory reconsolidation. And it means every act of remembering is also an act of change. The memory is not static. It breathes. And in this breathing, memory becomes more than a shadow. It becomes a living part of how you move through the world. When you step into a place you once loved, and your chest feels lighter, that is memory flowing through your body. When you hear a familiar laugh and your eyes fill, that is memory speaking in emotion. But sometimes memory holds pain. And when it returns, it arrives not as a thought, but as a reaction. Your heart quickens. Your muscles tighten. You don't remember what happened. You feel it. This is because emotional memories are stored not only in the hippocampus, but also in the amygdala, which keeps its own sharp record of fear and danger. These emotional imprints are powerful. They were meant to protect you, to remind you quickly of what once hurt. But over time, they can become too quick, too loud. The sound of a door closing might bring back years of anxiety. A sudden silence might feel like abandonment. The amygdala doesn't mean to overreact. It simply remembers, and its language is intensity. To help manage this, the prefrontal cortex steps in, the brain's wise counselor. It does not erase memory, it reframes it. It asks, is this danger still here? Is this feeling from now or from before? In doing so, it calms the amygdala. It speaks a slower language, one of reason, safety, presence. Over time, with repetition and care, this new dialogue becomes stronger. When memory returns, it no longer arrives as panic, but as something softer, something that can be felt, named, and released. The brain, through its plasticity, learns new responses. Old emotions are not removed. They are honoured, then gently redirected. This is part of what happens in therapy, in journaling, in deep conversation. When you speak a memory aloud, when you share its weight, the memory is reshaped. The brain binds the story to new context, new safety, new understanding. The hippocampus makes space for that update. The amygdala learns that this pain is no longer alone, and in that, healing begins. But memory doesn't only shape pain, it also holds the seeds of joy. When you remember something beautiful, your brain often responds as if it were happening now. The visual cortex lights up if you imagine a scene. The motor cortex stirs if you remember movement. The insula listens to the body's echoes, warmth in the chest, ease in the breath. These are not just memories, they are re-feelings, and this power can be used intentionally. When you choose to recall moments of connection, kindness, peace, the brain strengthens the pathways linked to those states. You're not escaping the present, you're enriching it. Memory becomes a tool for regulation, a lighthouse during darker moments. The cingulate cortex, especially the posterior cingulate, plays a role here. It helps link memory to self. It asks, what does this mean about me? And depending on how the memory is held, the answer can shape your sense of identity. If painful memories dominate unchecked, the brain may begin to tell a story of brokenness. But if those same memories are paired with resilience, with survival, with learning, with support, the story shifts. It becomes one of strength. This is why the stories we tell ourselves matter. The brain listens, it adapts, it wires its emotional networks around the language of those stories. Not just the events, but how we speak about them. A memory of loss can become a well of grief, or a source of depth. A memory of fear can remain sharp or be softened into wisdom. The words we use change the feelings we carry. Sleep again helps in this shaping. During deep stages of sleep, the brain replays emotional material, especially recent experiences. It doesn't just sort it, it reweights it. The emotional intensity is often reduced overnight. This is why a new day can bring a calmer view of something that felt overwhelming before. The brain has done quiet work while you dreamed. But sometimes a memory is not singular. It's layered. A single moment holds joy and sorrow, love and loss. The brain is capable of feeling both at once. It does not require you to simplify. In fact, it understands complexity well. Mixed emotions are a sign of integration, of deeper, fuller memory processing. A bittersweet song, a smile through tears. These are not contradictions, they are emotional richness. And the more we allow this richness, though without judgment, the more complete our memories become, not just as facts, but as feelings we are not afraid to carry. The hippocampus, the amygdala, the insula, the cortex, they all learn to work together. They form a chorus, not of perfection, but of understanding. So as the brain gathers the threads of memory and weaves them into our emotional lives, something sacred happens. We begin to know ourselves, not just through what we've done, but through what we've felt, survived, cherished, and let go. And every time we remember, we are not just looking backward, we are shaping the way forward. With each return to a feeling, the brain quietly asks, what shall I carry with me? And when that answer is chosen with care, with love, with softness, memory becomes not just a reminder, but a guide. Now let us bring this journey to its quiet resting place, the moment where memory becomes more than a whisper from the past, and instead becomes a companion to the present, walking beside you, shaping how you feel, how you act, and how you love. In the folds of your brain, memory and emotion are no longer separate paths. They merge like two streams meeting to form something wider, deeper, more alive. As you move through life, each experience leaves a trace, not just as knowledge, but as feeling. And as more traces form, your brain begins to build a story. Not a single story told in order, but a collection of remembered moments that together become your inner world. The medial prefrontal cortex, a part of the brain that helps form your sense of self, listens to these moments closely. It draws connections, it creates continuity. It gives you the feeling that you are the same person even as you change. This sense of self is emotional. You do not remember your life as a list. You remember it through sensation, through the warmth of sunlight on a birthday morning, through the ache in your chest when someone said goodbye, through the hush of silence after a moment that mattered. These memories become the map your emotions follow. They shape your beliefs, your reactions, your hopes, and even the memories you forget, the ones buried too deep for words, still live in you. They echo in your nervous system, in your habits, in your dreams. The basal ganglia, involved in learned routines, stores emotional memory and movement. A posture, a pause, the way you hold your breath in certain situations. These are emotional memories carried not in thought, but in body. This is why healing often involves the body as well as the mind. When you breathe differently, move differently, feel safe in new ways, the brain receives new signals. The old memory begins to soften. It learns, I am not where I was, I am somewhere new, and this new place feels safer. As the emotional brain integrates these updates, your experience of memory begins to change. A moment that once brought only pain may now bring a quiet strength. A thought that once triggered panic may now pass gently. This is not forgetting. It is the brain learning a new language for an old story. Sometimes this transformation happens slowly, like water wearing down stone. Sometimes it comes in a single moment, when a memory rises and you see it differently for the first time. Not as your fault, not as your failure, but as something that happened, that changed you, that now lives in you as part of your depth. In these moments, the posterior cingulate cortex, which helps you reflect on yourself, becomes active. It helps integrate new meaning into old memories. This is why writing, talking, reflecting, even in silence, can change how you feel. The memory is no longer frozen. It is breathing again. And when memory is allowed to breathe, it does more than carry emotion. It creates connection. Your brain does not keep these feelings only for yourself. The temporoparietal junction, involved in empathy, helps you feel what others feel. You recognize someone's grief because your brain knows your own. You comfort a friend because your emotions remember how it felt to be comforted. This is the gift of the memory transformed. It becomes a bridge between past and present, between self and other, between what hurt and what healed. The brain does not simply hold memories like artifacts. It uses them to build meaning, to guide behavior, to deepen presence. Even imagination carries memory forward. When you picture something that has never happened, a future day, a person you haven't met, a dream you hope to reach, your brain uses past emotional templates to fill in the picture. The colours you imagine, the warmth you expect, the feeling of joy or fear or hope, all drawn from memory. In this way, emotion and memory don't just shape the past. They shape possibility. And so the language of the brain is never just about what happened. It is about how what happened still lives inside you. It is in your choices, your reactions, the way you care, the way you protect, the way you try again. Each memory that holds emotion is not a burden. It is a thread, woven with care, with pain, with tenderness, woven into the way you speak, the way you pause, the way you reach for others. It is the soft wisdom behind your silence, the invisible story behind your strength. And when you look at someone else and see their hesitation, their joy, their tired eyes, your emotional brain recognizes it. It whispers, "You felt that too." And in that whisper is understanding, compassion, connection. So in the end, when memory becomes emotion, it becomes something more than a record. It becomes a heartbeat. It becomes language. It becomes the quiet fire that lights how you love, how you listen, how you learn. Let it be okay to feel your memories. Let them rise and pass. Let them teach. Let them soften. Because each time they do, your brain grows wiser. Not through knowing more, but through feeling more gently, through remembering not what happened, but what mattered. And in that remembering, you return to yourself, not as you were, but as you are now, whole, changed, alive. Love begins in the quiet, not with thunder, but with a softening. It is not always fireworks or breathless longing. Sometimes it is the hush that falls when someone enters the room, the way the body eases, the way the heart slows, not from fear, but from trust. Long before love becomes words or decisions, it is already forming in the brain, in signals, in chemistry, in warmth that spreads from thought to limb to breath. Love is not just felt, it is built. At the root of love are chemicals, messengers that flow through the body, shaping not just feeling, but the memory of that feeling. They rise slowly and stay long after touch or sight has passed. And they begin with oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, though its role is more complex. It is released in moments of closeness, a hug held just a little longer, a gaze returned, a hand reaching without needing to be asked. Oxytocin doesn't cause l'amour love, it supports it. It encourages trust, safety, a sense of being known. It tells the brain, this person is safe, this space is warm, stay. It flows between parent and child, between lovers, between friends, between humans and animals. Its pathways are ancient and they follow the contours of connection like rivers finding their way back to the sea. But oxytocin does not act alone. When love is new, especially romantic love, another chemical surges, dopamine. It brings energy, euphoria, focus. It makes you want to see them again. It makes their voice feel like music. It lights up the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, areas involved in reward and desire. You don't just like them, but you crave their presence. You feel pulled, lit from within. This dopamine high is natural and in many ways necessary. It binds two people together in the early stages of attachment. It helps the brain prioritize, to learn this person's voice, their face, the way they laugh, but it's not sustainable on its own. That's why over time love shifts, the sharpness softens, the pulse slows, and in its place grows something quieter, steadier. Serotonin brings balance. It supports mood, sleep, calm. When you love someone for a long time, serotonin helps maintain that love. It brings peace to the intensity. It allows you to share silence, to find joy and presence alone. It stabilizes the highs and lows of dopamine, grounding love in routine, in memory and trust. Then there's vasopressin, another hormone linked to long-term bonding, especially in the context of shared space and life. It supports the desire to stay, to protect, to build. In studies of certain animals that form lifelong bonds, such as prairie voles, vasopressin is one of the key messengers. It says, "This is home." And in all of this, the brain is not acting in isolation. The amygdala watches for emotion, for safety, for any trace of danger. When love feels threatened, it reacts. When love feels secure, it quiets. The prefrontal cortex, meanwhile, evaluates, is this person good for me? Can I be myself with them? Will they stay? These evaluations shape how the emotional chemicals behave. Love is not only chemical, it is cognitive too. Even the insula, that deep region that helps track internal states, lights up in love. It senses the heartbeat, the breath, the flutter in your chest when someone looks at you a certain way. It connects body and emotion. It reminds you that love is not only in the mind, it is in your skin, your stomach, your lungs. You don't just think love, you live it. And when someone touches you kindly, the somatosensory cortex lights up. But when that touch is linked to emotion, to love, the reaction is stronger. A hug from a stranger is not the same as a hug from someone you trust. The brain layers meaning onto sensation, turning touch into tenderness, into memory. These memories matter. When love is consistent, kind and safe, the brain stores it like a beacon. It becomes something you return to, not only when that person is there, but even when they are not. The hippocampus holding these memories blends them with the emotion given by the amygdala, and suddenly, even thinking of someone brings comfort. Their presence becomes portable. That is why love can be felt across distance, why a voice on the phone can calm, why a photo can bring tears. The brain does not need proximity to remember connection. It carries it like a scent, like a rhythm. But love also changes the brain itself. In people who experience deep attachment, especially over long periods, MRI scans show increased activity in the caudate nucleus, associated with learning and reward. The brain becomes wired to respond to that person. Their presence becomes a kind of safety signal. And in their absence, the brain feels lost, not just emotionally, but neurologically. Because love, when deep, becomes part of the self, the brain builds identity around connection, around shared routines, around mutual care, and when love ends, through distance, through change, through loss, the brain must rebuild. The pathways must quiet, the signals must shift. This is not easy, but it is possible. Because love, at its core, is adaptation. It is the brain responding to another, shaping itself around that connection. And when that connection is strong, filled with trust, joy, and understanding, the brain becomes a place of refuge. The chemicals don't just bring emotion, they bring healing. So when you feel love, soft or sharp, new or familiar, know that your brain is lighting up in a constellation of places, that your body is responding in rhythms older than memory, that your mind is opening to another, allowing them to matter, allowing them to stay. And in that opening, in that softening, in that steady hum of chemicals and connection, love becomes something more than emotion. It becomes a state of being. Let us now move further into love's quiet landscape, where the feelings begin to deepen, slow, and settle into something more lasting. After the first sparks of attraction and early connection, the brain starts to reshape its patterns. It is no longer simply responding to novelty or delight. It begins to prepare for something deeper, belonging. And in this belonging, the warm chemicals of love take on new roles. They do not flash and flare, they flow. In long-term love, oxytocin rises not only during moments of touch or intimacy, but in routines, in shared quiet, in mutual presence. It is released when someone brings you tea, when you laugh at the same memory, when you sit in a room together without needing to speak. Oxytocin does not shout. It affirms. It reminds the brain that love is not only emotion, it is attention over time. This continued release strengthens the bond. It creates emotional safety, allowing vulnerability to grow. And as vulnerability grows, so does trust, one of love's most delicate essential threads. Trust is not just a feeling. It is a neurological pattern, a reduced fear response in the amygdala, paired with increased regulation from the prefrontal cortex. It says, "You're safe with this person. You do not need to prepare for harm." In the presence of love, the brain rests. And in that resting, another transformation begins. The default mode network, the set of brain regions active during reflection and imagination, often includes thoughts of the loved one. They become part of your mental landscape, part of the stories your brain tells when it's not focused on the outside world. This is why love begins to shape your inner narrative, your daydreams, your worries, your hopes. Over time, your brain does not just experience love, it expects it. It integrates it into its daily rhythm. When someone texts you each morning and then one day doesn't, the brain notices. The absence triggers an alert, a subtle stress response. This is not neediness, it is wiring. The brain adapts to patterns of care, and when those patterns are disrupted, it feels it like a missing step in a familiar staircase. This is where cortisol, the stress hormone, begins to appear, not as a threat to love, but as a signal that something needs attention. Healthy love calms cortisol, it brings balance. But when love becomes uncertain or strained, cortisol rises, heart rate increases, muscles tense, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's stress system, awakens. This is why unresolved conflict in close relationships feels so intense. The brain experiences it as threat to survival. But just as love can trigger stress when threatened, it also offers powerful tools for repair. A warm embrace, a sincere apology, a moment of shared laughter. These acts release oxytocin and dopamine, lowering cortisol, calming the nervous system. This cycle, rupture and repair, is part of how the brain strengthens its bonds. Love does not avoid difficulty, it learns to return after. In committed partnerships, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex becomes more engaged. This region helps evaluate social situations, empathy, and morality. It guides choices not only based on personal reward, but on shared values. When love is mutual and enduring, the brain begins to consider the we more than the I. The decisions shift from individual benefit to collective harmony. And the more love grows, the more the mirror neuron system becomes involved. These special neurons allow us to feel another's emotions as if they were our own. In close relationships, this resonance deepens. You wince when they stub their toe. You feel joy when they smile. You ache when they cry. The lines blur, not in a loss of self, but in a shared experience of being. Even language shifts. People in long-term love often mirror each other's speech patterns, gestures, and habits. The anterior insula and inferior frontal gyrus help process these shared rhythms. Over time, the brain learns not just how to love, but how to express that love in a way the other understands. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of love in the brain is memory. The hippocampus stores not only the facts of your shared history, but the feelings that surrounded them. And as time passes, these memories become anchors, moments to return to when things feel uncertain. They hold joy, comfort, resilience. They say, "We've been through this before, we stayed." Love also strengthens the cingulate cortex, especially the subgenual region, associated with deep emotional connection and mood regulation. When this area is active, emotional pain is reduced. It helps the brain endure hardship not by denying it, but by holding it within the context of connection. This hurts, the brain says, but I am not alone. And in caregiving relationships, between parent and child, between partners who support one another, the periaqueductal gray becomes active. This part of the brain is linked to caregiving behaviors, pain relief, and empathy. Love, when rooted in care, activates neural pathways that reduce suffering. The presence of a loved one literally changes how pain is processed. So love, in its deeper forms, is not a single emotion. It is a state, a network, a memory in motion. The warm chemicals do not simply spike and vanish, and they build a foundation. And that foundation becomes a place where the mind can rest, where the heart can open, where the self can grow. And though these systems are built in biology, they are shaped by experience. How we are loved shapes how we love. What we expect, what we fear, what we trust, all of it is formed through interaction. And the beauty of the brain is that it can always learn. Love can always deepen. New patterns can always form. The warm chemicals of love are not magic. They are the result of connection, presence, patience. But in their rhythm, there is something close to magic. Something that feels like music remembered, or light returning after rain. A pulse that says, "You matter. You're known, you belong." And in that message, Repeated through gaze and word and silence, the brain finds peace. Love does not ask the brain to work harder. It invites the brain to soften, to trust, to stay. Now let us arrive at love's quietest space, the part where it no longer asks to be noticed, but simply is, where the warm chemicals, once bright with excitement, settle into something deeper and slower. Here love is not something chased or held tightly. It becomes the soft rhythm beneath your thoughts. It becomes part of who you are. In this stage of love, often called companionate love or enduring attachment, the brain changes in subtle ways. The prefrontal cortex, which helps manage behavior, becomes more synchronized with emotional regions like the amygdala and insula. This harmony allows a person to act with more patience, empathy, and steadiness. Love becomes less about what is felt in a moment, and more about how one chooses to respond over time. And these choices, to show up, to forgive, to listen, to stay, reinforce the brain's emotional pathways. Each small gesture releases a trickle of oxytocin. Each shared memory rekindles the hippocampus. Each quiet moment builds trust not through words but through consistency. The brain, seeing this, begins to associate love not just with emotion but with safety, with home. Even in the absence of novelty, these chemicals still flow. Love does not need drama to stay alive. In fact, the ventral pallidum, a region associated with long-term attachment, becomes more active during stable, enduring love than in early infatuation. It supports behaviors that maintain connection, the cup of tea left on the table, the text saying, "I'm here," the hand that reaches for yours in sleep. These are not grand gestures. They are the architecture of deep love. The more posterior cingulate cortex, involved in self-reflection and understanding others, begins to strengthen as well. Love, over time, becomes a mirror. The brain uses the presence of another, not just for pleasure or bonding, but to understand the self more deeply. In the context of long-term love, people grow, not by becoming the same, but by feeling safe enough to become more fully themselves. This kind of love holds the memory like soil holds roots. When a loved one is gone, through distance or loss, the brain continues to respond. Their voice may echo in your mind. Their habits may shape your own. This is not imagination. The emotional pathways they helped form remain active. The brain has internalized their presence. This is why grief is so powerful. Love, once integrated, does not vanish. It leaves behind a pattern, neural, emotional, physical, that aches in absence. The anterior cingulate cortex, active during both social bonding and pain, lights up during grief. It recognizes that something meaningful is missing. But over time, this activation softens. The brain begins to reprocess the connection, placing it gently into memory. And in that memory, love continues. It becomes a source of strength, of grounding. The brain learns to carry presence without touch, connection without proximity. In this way, love teaches the brain something extraordinary, that some bonds are not broken by time. They are rewritten into the story of who you are. Even solitary love, the love you feel for someone who may not be near or may no longer be here, continues to shape the brain. Just thinking of that person can reduce cortisol, raise oxytocin, shift heart rate. The brain responds not only to what is real, but to what is remembered with depth. And love is not limited to people. The same pathways that support attachment are active when we care for animals, for places, for communities. When you feel peace in the woods or joy in returning home, your brain releases the same warm chemicals. Love, at its essence, is about connection. And connection, the brain tells us, is everywhere. The act of loving also teaches resilience. In long-term studies, people who feel loved show better immune responses, longer lifespans, lower risk of disease. This is not coincidence. The chemicals of love, especially oxytocin and serotonin, help regulate the entire body. They ease inflammation. They support rest. They allow the body to repair. Love is not just an emotional balm, it is biological protection. And in return, the brain protects love. It encodes it, replays it, reaches for it. Even when we are afraid, even when we are hurt, the emotional brain remembers what it feels like to be safe, to be understood, to be loved. And in that remembering, we often find our way back. Because love, once deeply rooted, becomes a compass. It guides your reactions. It shapes your longings. It whispers in difficult moments. Choose kindness. Try again. Stay open. The orbitofrontal cortex, involved in decision-making and emotional evaluation, leans more heavily on love the more it is practiced. It helps us love even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And so the warm chemicals of love continue, not as spikes of euphoria, but as gentle waves. They are in the way you sit closer without thinking, in the way your breath slows near someone familiar, in the way your body relaxes at a voice it trusts. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of belonging. And belonging is not just a social need. It is a neurological pattern. The brain, left in isolation, becomes distressed. But in love, real, quiet, enduring love, it finds rhythm. It finds light. It finds rest. So when you feel love, old or new, near or far, know that something deep is happening. Know that your brain is listening, responding, learning, changing, and that within you a quiet language is being spoken. A language not of words, but of breath and chemicals and time. A language that says, you're here, you're safe, you are loved. And that, in the end, is what love does. It anchors you in the present. It heals what is wounded. It lets your brain become a home, not just for thought, but for tenderness. Not just for memory, but for meaning. And in that home, you live more fully. You feel more deeply. You become, slowly and quietly, more yourself. There is a rhythm inside you that began before your first breath, a soft thump, a steady beat echoing through your chest like a quiet drum in the dark. This rhythm is the sound of your heart, and it has been speaking to your brain since the earliest days of your life. Not with words, but with waves of pressure, pulses of movement, and subtle signals sent through blood and nerve. The brain does not just command the heart, it listens, it learns, and in that listening it finds its way. The relationship between brain and heart is not one of dominance. It is a conversation. With every beat, your heart sends information upward through the vagus nerve, a long wandering strand that reaches from your chest to your brainstem. This nerve carries messages about how fast your heart is beating, how hard it is working, how steady or erratic it feels. And the brain, ever alert, receives these messages and interprets them, sometimes without you even knowing. At the base of the brain, the medulla oblongata helps regulate basic heart rhythms. It watches closely. If your blood pressure rises, it signals the heart to slow. If oxygen drops, it tells the heart to work harder. These responses are automatic. They are the quiet mechanics of survival. But beyond survival, there is something more, the emotional response. Higher up in the brain, the insula receives heart signals and translates them into feeling. It notices the flutter when you're nervous, the heaviness when you're grieving, the lightness when you're in love. The insula is the bridge between sensation and awareness. It turns heartbeats into stories. It tells you this matters. And the anterior cingulate cortex, nestled deep between the two hemispheres of the brain, adds another layer. It listens to both emotion and sensation. It helps you notice the moment your breath catches, the pause before tears come, and the trembling before speaking. This region doesn't just monitor, it tunes your attention to the emotional tone of your body. And so the heart becomes a narrator, not just a pump. In this way, every emotional experience is partly physical. When you feel afraid, your heart races, not just because of fear, but as part of fear. When you feel safe, your heart slows. It speaks to your brain in steady signals that say, you're okay. This constant feedback loop shapes your experience of the world. And sometimes it begins even before thought. You might walk into a room and feel uneasy, even if nothing is visibly wrong. The heart may have picked up on tiny shifts, in lighting, in posture, in silence, and sent that information upward. The brain receives it and begins to prepare. Not always logically, but instinctively. This is interoception, your ability to sense the state of your internal body. It is how the brain listens to the heart and feels the meaning behind its rhythm. This communication becomes especially powerful in moments of calm. When you breathe slowly, deeply, with awareness, the heart responds. Its rhythm evens out. Its signals grow stronger and clearer. This is called heart rate variability, the gentle rise and fall between beats. A high variability means the heart is responsive, adaptable, and the brain listens closely to this signal. People with high heart rate variability tend to recover more quickly from stress. They tend to regulate emotion more effectively. Their brains, attuned to the body's internal signals, know when to rest, when to act, when to wait. It's not about being strong, it's about being connected to the breath, to the body, to the heartbeat within. Even the prefrontal cortex, the brain's thoughtful decision-making center, listens to the heart. It uses the body's signals to guide choices, to calm impulses, to bring presence. When the heart feels calm, the prefrontal cortex works better. Thoughts become clearer. Reactions soften. The world feels less urgent. This is why practices like meditation, mindfulness, and deep breathing are so powerful. They are not just calming ideas, they are physiological shifts. They change the dialogue between brain and heart. They allow the brain to hear the heart more clearly, and in that clarity, emotion becomes more manageable. Fear becomes quieter. Joy becomes more grounded. Attention returns. And yet, the heart is not only a mirror of the brain, it also shapes how we connect with others. When two people sit together, especially if they are close, their heart rates can begin to synchronize. Their breathing may fall into rhythm. Their nervous systems begin to attune to one another. This is co-regulation, the shared language of safety and presence. It is how love, empathy, and understanding travel without words. The amygdala, long known for its role in fear, is also involved in social connection. It watches the heart signals and pairs them with the emotional context of the moment. If someone offers kindness and your heart calms in response, the amygdala stores that. It learns that this person, this place, this moment is safe. And so, over time, the heart teaches the brain what home feels like, not just in places, but in people. It learns the rhythms of connection, what it feels like to be heard, to be touched, to be understood. These memories are not just mental, they are visceral. They live in your pulse. When the brain listens well to the heart, the whole self becomes more integrated. Reactions slow, attention deepens. Emotion becomes a wave, not a flood. You begin to know not just what you think, but what you feel, and the knowing makes life softer, because the heart speaks in more than beats. It speaks in pauses, in shifts, in the sudden stillness when awe arrives, in the flutter of hope, in the steadiness of love. The brain does not translate this into words, it translates it into presence. So each day as your heart beats on, with steadiness, with softness, with strength, your brain is listening. And in that listening it finds a rhythm to follow, a truth to return to, a way of being that is not just thought but feeling, not just sound but meaning. Let us follow this rhythm even further, into the places where the conversation between brain and heart becomes a guide. This is not just about physiology, it is about the way you experience life, because when the brain listens to the heart, it does more than monitor. It learns to respond with wisdom, with gentleness, and with presence. Inside you is a constant stream of data, blood pressure, heart rate, breathing pace, the quiet shifts in your chest that you do not always notice. The brain listens through nerves, through hormones, through sensations. This awareness is called interoceptive awareness, and it is the foundation of emotional intelligence. It helps you recognize what you're feeling, not because someone told you, but because your body told your brain, the insula. The region that processes these internal signals becomes a kind of emotional compass. When it's tuned well, you can tell the difference between fear and hunger, between sadness and fatigue, between excitement and anxiety. These feelings may look alike on the surface, a racing heart, a rush of breath, but the brain, listening carefully, begins to distinguish them. This ability to interpret the heart signals is part of the emotional regulation. If you sense rising tension in your chest and know it's anxiety, your brain can begin to calm you. The SAS prefrontal cortex steps in, slows the reaction, helps you choose. If you feel that same flutter but know it's anticipation, your brain may lean into it, seeing it as energy instead of threat. The difference lies in awareness, the brain's ability to understand the message sent from the body. Over time, this listening creates patterns. The brain learns from each experience. It begins to recognize which heart signals lead to joy, which to fear, which to comfort. The amygdala, which once reacted to every loud beat as a sign of danger, becomes more refined. It begins to trust your experience. It begins to say, "We've felt this before and we made it through." And when the brain trusts the body, something remarkable happens. Resilience grows. Resilience is not a trait. It is a relationship between breath and thought, between sensation and memory, between heart and mind. The stronger this relationship, the more easily you return to balance after stress. Even the hypothalamus, a deep brain structure that regulates stress responses, relies on this heart-brain dialogue. When it senses calm through the vagus nerve, it slows the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. It allows the body to return to a state of rest, not because the world is suddenly easy, but because your internal system knows how to respond with care. This state is known as coherence, when heart, brain and breath are aligned. You feel steady, clear, connected. Thoughts flow gently. Emotions pass without overwhelm. Your presence deepens. And this state is not rare. It is trainable. Practices like heart-focused breathing, meditation, or simply pausing to feel your pulse help build it. The vagus nerve, which plays a central role in this process, is like a bridge. When activated gently, as slow exhaling, humming, laughter or touch, it sends signals to the brain saying all is well. These signals shift your nervous system out of fight or flight and into rest and digest. They allow the prefrontal cortex to think more clearly. They lower the volume on fear. They make space for joy. And when joy arrives, perhaps in the form of laughter, of gratitude, of awe, your heart responds. It softens. Its rhythm becomes more fluid. And the brain receives this new pattern with openness. It learns to expect beauty, to look for meaning, to find calm even in uncertainty. This is why the heart's rhythm affects your thoughts. A steady rhythm supports clearer thinking. Irregularity can make thoughts feel scattered. Your cognitive function is not only shaped by logic, it is shaped by sensation, by rhythm, by whether your brain feels safe enough to explore. And this safety, over time, becomes emotional trust, not only with others, but with yourself. When your brain listens to your heart and hears steadiness, it begins to trust your feelings. It stops second-guessing your sadness, your joy, your intuition. It learns to believe the body. Intuition, that quiet sense of knowing without logic, and often begins in the body. The brain receives the signal, feels the tightness or ease, and responds before thought catches up. This is not magic, it is practice. It is pattern recognition, shaped by a lifetime of heart-brain conversations. Even decisions, what to say, where to go, who to trust, are shaped by this inner dialogue. The orbitofrontal cortex, which integrates emotional and social information, uses heart signals as one more piece of data. A warm presence might lower your heart rate. A tense situation might speed it up. The brain weighs these cues, often without words, and points you toward or away. And when you listen, truly listen to your heart, something ancient awakens. Not fear, not urgency, but presence. You begin to live more fully in the moment. You stop racing ahead or circling the past. You land in your breath, in your chest, in the truth of what is now, because the heart, though simple in structure, is wise in rhythm. It does not speak in sentences. It speaks in pulses, in rises and falls, in the quiet steadiness that says, "You're alive, you're here, keep going." And the brain, when it listens without rushing, hears this. It lets go of the need to always analyze. It settles into the flow. And in that settling, something soft returns. Calm, clarity, connection. The heart is not just a physical organ. It is a messenger, a center, a guide. So pause now and then. Feel your own rhythm. Let the brain listen, not for answers, but for the shape of feeling. Let that shape guide you, not with force, but with quiet trust. Because in the spaces where the brain and heart meet, life begins to make sense in a different way, not through explanation, but through presence, through rhythm, through listening. Let us now bring this gentle journey to its close, not with an end, but with a pause, a return to the quiet rhythm that has been there all along. Because at the heart of this story is not a secret or a solution, it is a simple truth. Your brain has always been listening to your heart. And in that listening, something tender has been growing. Awareness, trust, balance. Sadness also slows us down. the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and decision-making, may quiet itself in moments of deep sorrow. You may feel tired, unable to focus. That is not laziness, but it's biology. The brain is conserving energy, turning inward, allowing space for the storm to pass. It is choosing balance, so you can listen more closely to what your heart is saying. Chemistry plays a role too. Levels of serotonin, a neurotransmitter that helps regulate mood, may drop during sadness. The brain's natural rhythm becomes uneven. You might feel less joy in things that once made you smile. This is not your fault. It is part of how the brain responds to loss. And still, sadness does not live only in the mind. It settles in the body too. You might feel it as weight in the chest, as a hollowness in the stomach, as a dull ache behind the eyes. These sensations are not imagined. They are messages passed along by the vagus nerve, carried in the rhythm of your breath, the tension of your muscles, the stillness of your hands. This physical sadness is important. It makes the emotion real, impossible to ignore. And in doing so, it asks for care. It asks you to slow down, to rest, to wrap yourself in quiet, in warmth, in patience. Just as the body needs time to heal a bruise, the mind needs time to understand its pain. But sadness is not the same for everyone. In some, it comes as tears. In others, as silence. In many, it hides beneath irritability, restlessness, or retreat. The brain weaves emotion into each person's life differently. It remembers every moment that shaped you, and sadness, when it comes, is shaped by those same threads. Sometimes sadness is linked to memory, a scent, a place, a date on the calendar. They can open doors in the mind. Behind those doors may be people, moments, hopes long gone. The hippocampus retrieves these memories not as cold facts, but as living echoes. And with them it brings back the feelings that once wrapped around them. It's why you might cry at a photo or feel your throat tighten when hearing a familiar song. The brain is remembering with feeling, not just thought. And yet even in deep sadness there is a strange kind of beauty. It means you are still feeling, still connected, still human. The numbness that comes when we shut out emotion may feel safer, but it is emptier. Sadness, though painful, is a sign that your emotional self is still alive. Even tears have a purpose. Scientists have found that emotional tears contain different chemicals than those from irritation. They help release stress. They signal to others that you are in need. Crying is not weakness. It is a form of expression, as ancient as the first heartbeat, as natural as rain. And when others see our sadness, something remarkable happens. Their brains respond. The mirror neurons. Those mental cells that allow us to feel what others feel begin to glow. They create empathy. They remind us that sorrow, though deeply personal, is also deeply shared. So sadness hides in many places, in cells and signals, in muscles and memories, in silence and sighs. But it is never aimless. It always points somewhere, toward healing, toward meaning, toward change. It asks us to pause, to feel, to remember. And in doing so it begins to move, slowly, quietly. Like a river wearing down a stone, it teaches us that feeling is not the end. It is the beginning of something softer, something wiser, something new. Let's follow sadness a little deeper now. Not to escape it, but to understand the quiet places where it rests, the paths it follows, and the way it slowly reshapes the mind from within. Sadness, like water, moves differently than joy. It pools in stillness, it seeps through cracks we didn't know were there. And when it lingers, it begins to shape not only how we feel, but how we see. In long stretches of sadness, or what we sometimes call depression, the brain begins to adapt, not all at once and not always visibly. But beneath the surface, patterns form. This default mode network, which we use to reflect, to dream, to remember, can become a hall of echoes. Instead of imagining hope, it replays loss. Instead of reaching forward, it loops backward. This network, designed to help us understand ourselves, becomes too loud, too busy, too heavy with thought. When this happens, we ruminate. We turn the same feeling over and over like a stone in our hands, hoping it will change. But sadness does not respond to force. It responds to presence. It softens not when we fight it, but when we listen, when we sit beside it without rushing it away. Inside the brain, this amygdala becomes more sensitive during depression. It begins to react more strongly to negative signals, not because it wants to harm us, but because it is trying to protect us. It is alert, watching, bracing. But this constant watchfulness becomes exhausting. The brain, always on edge, begins to interpret neutral things as painful, uncertain things as dangerous, and slowly the world feels dimmer. The prefrontal cortex, our seat of planning and control, also begins to change. It may lose some of its balance, its ability to calm the amygdala, to organize emotion, to choose new thoughts. Instead, it may become tangled in doubt, frozen by indecision. Simple tasks can feel overwhelming. Time stretches strangely and either too slow or too fast, and the future feels far away. Chemical messengers shift too. Serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, each involved in shaping mood, motivation, energy, may become imbalanced. It is not simply that we feel sad, it's that our ability to feel anything shrinks. Food has no taste, music feels distant, the colours of life fade, but the brain, even in sadness, is not still. It is always listening, always learning. Neuroplasticity, the brain's quiet ability to change, never stops, and even the experience of sadness leaves a trail the mind can use later. Because every time we survive sorrow, the brain makes note. It remembers that you continued, that you breathed through it, that the wave passed, even if only slightly. These small shifts matter. One of the most powerful tools the brain has is awareness. The ability to notice what it is doing. When we notice sadness, not judge it, not panic in its presence, but simply see it, the brain begins to shift its posture. The consular, which watches the internal state of the body, starts to work with the anterior cingulate cortex, which notices conflict. Together they signal something is off, and in that signal is the beginning of change. Therapies that treat sadness often begin here, by helping the brain notice itself. Mindfulness, breathwork, gentle movement, talking out loud, these are not just ideas, they are physical actions that reshape neural patterns. When you focus on your breath, for example, the prefrontal cortex begins to reconnect with the body. It learns again how to steer. Even naming a feeling, just saying "I feel sad," activates different brain regions than keeping it silent. Language brings light to corners that were dark, and with light comes the possibility of movement. But change is not fast. The brain does not leap out of sadness like a switch turning on. It climbs slowly, one signal at a time, and it does so by finding new meanings in old places. A walk that once felt pointless begins to feel grounding. A song that once hurt becomes a comfort. A memory that once ached becomes something tender. These are not big changes, but they are real, and they begin to lift the weight. The social brain plays a role too. Humans are not meant to carry sorrow alone. The temporoparietal junction, medial prefrontal cortex, and posterior cingulate, all parts of the brain involved in understanding others, light up when we connect, when we speak, when we are seen. Sadness often tells us to hide, but healing often begins when we are found. And so the presence of another person, someone who listens without trying to fix, becomes a form of medicine, not because they say the right thing, but because they offer space, safety, time. These things allow the brain to feel emotion without drowning in it, to process without rushing. Even nature, its colours, sounds, movements, has been shown to ease the neural patterns of sadness. A tree does not ask you to smile, a river does not demand answers, but your brain in its presence begins to breathe differently, to slow, to shift. These small changes add up. Over days, over weeks, the architecture of thought begins to tilt towards balance again. The brain does not erase sadness. It integrates it. It weaves it into the larger fabric of who we are. A chapter, not the whole story. A season, not the sky. And as it does, something else begins to emerge. Not the absence of sadness, but the presence of wisdom. Sadness, when moved through gently, often leaves behind compassion. You begin to see others more clearly. You recognize pain in their silence. You offer softness where once there was judgment. This is not weakness. This is growth. This is the brain, having travelled through shadow, learning to carry light. Now we come to the gentle closing of this journey. the place where sadness, though still present, has shifted shape. It no longer stands like a storm on the horizon. Instead, it rests more quietly, like a memory folded into the corners of thought. The brain, having felt deeply, does not forget, but it learns to hold sadness differently, not as a weight, but as a thread woven through the fabric of experience. This transformation is not sudden, it is slow, like the way dawn arrives, not in one burst of light, but in many soft moments, each one brightening the next. In the brain, this lightness grows as emotional regulation strengthens. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which helps balance feeling and reason, becomes more active. It doesn't cancel sadness, it steadies it. It holds the amygdala's hand. It listens and then says gently, "I hear you, and we are safe now." Safety is essential. Without it, the emotional brain cannot rest. It remains in alert, in worry, in defense. But with safety, found in relationships, in routines, and in the quiet rhythm of breath, the brain begins to soften. The nervous system, always listening, calms its signals. The vagus nerve loosens its grip on the body's chest and breath. The shoulders drop, the eyes feel heavier, not with sorrow, but with rest. In this softened state, something unexpected begins to grow, resilience. It is not the armor people imagine. It is not hard, it is supple. It bends without breaking. It learns how to feel without being drowned. And in the brain, resilience shows itself in the ability to recover, to return to balance even after sorrow visits. This recovery is helped by meaning. When sadness can be understood, not solved but seen, it becomes lighter. And meaning is not always grand. It can be a realization that pain brought you closer to someone. That loss made you notice beauty, that sitting with sadness taught you how to stay. The posterior cingulate cortex, involved in reflection, helps shape this meaning. It connects past to present, weaving a story from the quiet spaces. Stories help the brain integrate what happened. That's why people often journal or speak aloud or return to the same memory in different ways. Each time the story becomes more complete, the emotional charge softens. The brain finds structure in what once felt like chaos. This is not forgetting, this is healing. And healing, like emotion, is not linear. Sadness can return, as a whisper, a breeze, a sudden echo. But when the brain has been allowed to process, these returns feel different. They are not floods, they are waves. And the mind, now stronger, now steadier, lets them pass without fear. Sometimes what helps most is the act of giving. When we help others through sorrow, our own sadness finds new ground. The dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, which helps us understand the emotions of others, activates in these moments. The brain finds reward in connection, in kindness, in empathy. It says, "What I learned in my darkness, I now offer as light." And in that offering, sadness changes form. It becomes compassion. It becomes softness. It becomes the quiet voice that sits beside someone else and says, "I've been there too." That voice carries more than comfort. It carries truth. It says that emotions do not make us fragile. They make us whole. Even in solitude, this transformation continues. When we sit with ourselves without running, without numbing, without shame, the emotional brain feels seen. The insula, tuned to the body's internal state, begins to harmonize with the rest of the brain. The signals become clearer. The mind, no longer pushing against sadness, learns to rest with it. And in that rest, new thoughts bloom. Joy returns, not as fireworks, but as a quiet warmth. Laughter comes back, slowly at first, then more freely. The world begins to glow again, not because sadness is gone, but because we've made room for both light and shadow. This is the mind in balance, not perfect, not untouched, but alive. In this balance, we begin to notice the small things, the way sunlight moves across a floor, the way someone's voice sounds when they say your name, the way a familiar scent pulls you out of thought and into presence. These are not escapes, they are anchors. They remind the brain that the present is not only sorrow, it is full, layered, real. And over time, as we continue to move through life, sadness becomes part of our strength. Not something to overcome, but something to understand. The brain carries it like a well-read book. Pages softened, corners folded, words remembered. It no longer overwhelms, it informs, it deepens everything it touches. So where does sadness go when it no longer hurts as much? It settles in the mind's quiet places, in wisdom, in patience, in gentleness. It becomes the pause before we speak, the care in how we listen, the softness in how we hold others. It becomes part of who we are, not as a wound, but as a thread, strong, necessary, and full of meaning. This is where sadness hides in the mind, not in darkness, but in depth, not to harm, but to teach. And if we listen closely, not with fear, but with kindness, we will hear what it's been saying all along. You loved, you lost, you felt. And because of that, you grew. There is a spark that lives deep in the folds of the brain, a gentle, glowing signal that travels faster than thought and softer than breath. It is the lightness you feel when something unexpected makes you smile. The warmth that spreads from the center of your chest when laughter rises without warning. The sudden lift of the spirit when the world just for a moment feels safe, bright, and full of wonder. This is joy, not a noise, not a demand, but a language. And it is spoken in the space between neurons. At its core, joy is not just a reaction, it is communication. A whisper exchange between billions of tiny messengers, neurons, synapses, chemicals and signals, all dancing together in quiet celebration. The brain doesn't wait for joy to arrive from the outside, it creates joy from within, shaping it through connection, memory, safety and meaning. When you experience joy, one of the first chemicals to rise is dopamine, often called the feel-good neurotransmitter. But dopamine doesn't just make you feel good. It tells your brain this matters. It marks a moment as important, rewarding, worth remembering. Whether it's the taste of something sweet, the laugh of a friend, or the success of solving a small problem, dopamine signals that you are alive and something beautiful has just happened. Dopamine is released by a group of neurons deep in the midbrain, especially in an area called the ventral tegmental area, VTA. From there, it travels to parts of the brain like the nucleus accumbens, which helps process pleasure, and the prefrontal cortex, which helps you decide what brings meaning to your life. This path is sometimes called the reward circuit, and it is the core route joy takes through the brain. But dopamine is only one part of the story. True joy, the kind that stays in your chest long after the moment has passed, also comes from connection. The feeling of belonging, of being seen, of being held. For this, the brain releases oxytocin, the chemical of trust and bonding. It flows through you when you hug someone, when you laugh with someone, when you feel safe in someone's presence. It says, you are not alone. And with oxytocin comes serotonin, another gentle messenger that helps regulate mood. It brings stability, it smooths out the edges, it is the feeling of contentment, of peace, of things being just right, even if only for a moment. Serotonin moves more slowly than dopamine, but it stays longer, like sunlight that lingers even after the sky has turned gold. These chemicals don't act in isolation, they work together, not like a switchboard, but like an orchestra. Joy is not one note, it is many, layered together with perfect timing. And the neurons in your brain, each one with branches like trees and lights like stars, listen for the rhythm. They send signals down long, delicate axons, across synapses and into other neurons. With each pulse, with each release of neurotransmitter, the feeling of joy spreads. Sometimes joy comes quickly, a surprise, a joke, a reunion. Other times it grows slowly, through patterns, through presence, through quiet appreciation. The brain learns to anticipate joy, and in that anticipation it begins to feel joy before the source even arrives. Just the thought of something good can trigger the same neural pathways. That is the power of imagination. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain just behind your forehead, plays a quiet role in this. It helps you decide what to focus on, what to value, what to expect. When it chooses to look for beauty, for kindness, for gratitude, for awe, it strengthens the brain's sensitivity to joy. This is why people who practice gratitude often feel more joy over time. The brain is not simply reacting to the world, it is shaping how the world is experienced. There are other places joy travels too. The insula, which monitors your body's internal signals, helps translate emotion into sensation. The flutter in your chest, the lightness in your arms, the sense that your skin is buzzing softly, as if it too were smiling. These are not tricks, they are signals, messages carried through nerves, hormones and breath telling you something joyful is happening here. And then there's movement. When you dance, when you jump, when you sway with laughter, your brain responds not just emotionally but physically. The motor cortex, the cerebellum, the basal ganglia, all these regions join in, turning joy into motion. It's why laughter often shakes your whole body. Why celebration is not quiet. Joy wants to move. It wants to ripple outward. Even memory joins the conversation. When you feel joy, the hippocampus begins recording not just the event, but the feeling. It remembers the way your breath caught, the sound that surrounded you, the way light fell through the window. These are the details that come back later, when a scent or a sound brings the memory rushing in, and with it, the feeling. And perhaps most beautiful of all, joy is contagious. When someone around you smiles, your key mirror neurons, special brain cells that copy what you see, begin to fire. You feel a shadow of their joy in your own body. This is not imagination, it is resonance. The brain does not wait for joy to be personal, it invites it to be shared. As life moves around you, with its noise, its demands, its uncertainty, the brain often tries to think its way through. It calculates, it plans, it predicts. But beneath all that effort, there is something slower and wiser, the beat of your heart, steady and present, asking nothing more than for you to feel it. And when the brain finally pauses, when it lets go of thought just long enough to hear the heart's message, something beautiful begins to happen. The nervous system shifts. The autonomic signals change. You breathe more deeply, your muscles soften, you stop bracing against the future, you begin to inhabit the present. This is not an idea, it is measurable. Scientists have recorded how heart rate patterns influence alpha brain waves, the gentle electrical signals that rise during calm meditative states. When the heart finds rhythm, the brain mirrors it. Thought becomes less fragmented, emotion becomes more fluid. You begin to feel like yourself again, not as an idea but as a sensation. And over time this sensation becomes familiarity. The brain learns that the heart's signals are trustworthy. It listens to the rhythm not only for survival but for meaning. The insula grows more active. The prefrontal cortex becomes more balanced. Emotional reactivity decreases. You begin to carry calm with you. In relationships, this shift becomes even more profound. When you are attuned to your own heart, you begin to notice others more deeply. You hear what is not said. You feel the space between words. You sense when someone is afraid, not because of logic, but because your body tells you. This is empathic resonance, the blending of heart-brain listening and social connection. Couples who maintain strong, emotionally intelligent bonds often show heart rate synchronization during moments of closeness. Parents and infants do this too. The brain doesn't do this alone. The heart leads. And in its rhythm, two nervous systems learn to trust, to soothe, to belong. Even in solitude, this bond remains. The heart is always with you. Its signals are always there, always willing to be heard. When grief arrives, the heart's rhythm shifts. When wonder returns, it lightens again. The brain, if it stays close, learns to meet each wave with presence instead of resistance. This is how healing begins, not in solving, but in listening. Listening to the tightness in the chest, to the ache behind the eyes, to the warmth in the ribs when joy rises again. These are not distractions, they are data. They are the story of what it means to be alive in this body in this moment. The posterior cingulate cortex, a region involved in self-reflection, begins to weave these signals into your story. You begin to know yourself not just by what you think or achieve, but by how you feel, how you breathe, how you move through difficulty with care. The narrative becomes less about control and more about compassion. Even your decisions shift. The orbitofrontal cortex begins to weigh the body's wisdom alongside logic. You make choices not just because they make sense, but because they feel aligned. You trust the unease that says wait. You follow the pull that says yes. This is not impulse. It is integration. And integration over time becomes peace. Not the kind of peace that demands stillness or silence, but the kind that holds motion gently. The peace that says, I don't need to know everything, I just need to stay present. And in that presence, life slows, the world opens, the mind softens. This doesn't mean you won't feel fear or doubt or sadness, you will. The heart feels everything, but when the brain listens, it doesn't panic. It doesn't shut down, it says, I know this beat, I've felt this before, let's stay. And in that staying, something new grows. Coherence, resilience, wholeness. These are not traits you're born with. They are skills. They are the result of listening to the heart again and again until its rhythm becomes your anchor. So the next time you feel lost, return to this rhythm, not with force, not with urgency, just with quiet. Place a hand on your chest. Breathe slowly. Let your brain notice what it has forgotten, that inside you is a compass, already turning toward calm, already whispering, you are here, you are safe, you are enough. Because when the brain listens to the heart, it learns something no thought can teach, that the most reliable wisdom is not the loudest. It is the soft beat beneath your ribs. It is the warmth behind your breath. It is the stillness you carry inside, even when the world moves too fast. And that, more than anything, is what makes the heart and brain a team. Not because one leads and the other follows, but because together they remind you what it means to feel, to belong, to be fully, beautifully alive. Hush does not always enter loudly. Sometimes it arrives like a breeze that cools the skin without warning, or a flicker in the chest that tightens without reason. You do not always see it, but you feel it. A shift in breath, a pause in movement, a sudden awareness of everything that could go wrong. This is not weakness. This is the brain doing what it was shaped to do. Listen for danger, respond to threat, keep you safe. At the center of this listening is the amygdala, a small almond-shaped cluster buried deep in the brain's temporal lobe. Though tiny, it holds great power. It watches constantly, receiving information from your senses, your memory, your body, and when something feels off, even slightly, it responds. Not with thought, but with signal, a surge of electricity, a change in heart rate, a whisper to the nervous system. Prepare. The amygdala does not ask whether the danger is real. It asks whether it feels familiar, whether it echoes something from before. It is fast, reactive, emotional. It can respond in milliseconds, far before the slower reasoning parts of the brain catch up. This is its job, to keep you alive by sensing risk quickly, instinctively. But fear does not live in the amygdala alone. Once triggered, the signal travels. It reaches the hypothalamus, which starts the PHPA axis, a chain reaction that releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These chemicals flood your system. Your pupils dilate, your heart races, blood rushes to your muscles. You become ready to run, to fight, to freeze. And while this may feel uncomfortable, it is ancient. It is the same system that kept your ancestors alive in forests, in storms, in the face of wild animals. The body remembers. It knows how to survive. Yet in modern life, most threats are not lions in the grass. They are emails, glances, decisions, uncertainties. The body still reacts, but now the fear lingers. The chemicals do not clear quickly. The mind loops. The system stays alert long after the danger has passed. This is where fear becomes chronic, not just a response, but a state. The amygdala remains sensitized. The prefrontal cortex, which usually helps regulate emotion, may lose control. Fear becomes louder. Thought becomes narrow. Everything begins to feel urgent. But the brain does not only react to fear, it remembers it. The hippocampus, responsible for memory, records not just what happened, but how it felt. And when a similar situation arises, even years later, that feeling returns. The context may be new, but the signal is the same. This is emotional memory. The echo of fear inside us. And this echo lives in the body too. The insula, which tracks internal states, registers the heartbeat, the clenched stomach, the shallow breath. These sensations reinforce the fear. You feel afraid because your body says you are, and the brain believes the body. Yet even as fear tightens its grip, the brain is learning. With each experience, it builds patterns. It begins to distinguish true threat from false alarm. It shapes its response based on context, on support, on memory. And this learning begins quietly with awareness. When you notice fear rising in your chest, in your hands, in your thoughts, the what prefrontal cortex can engage. It says, I see this, let's look closer. This is not the absence of fear. It is the beginning of control. The amygdala does not vanish, but its voice is softened. This is why grounding techniques work, why naming the fear helps. When you label the emotion, you engage language centers. You activate the left prefrontal cortex, which can calm the amygdala. The brain begins to map the feeling rather than drown in it. You're not escaping fear. You're making room for it to pass. And it does pass. The chemicals that surge in fear have a lifespan. Once the brain believes the danger is over, the parasympathetic nervous system activates. The heart rate slows, muscles relax, the body begins to repair, the brain returns to balance. Not all at once, but gradually, breath by breath. But some fears stay longer. Trauma leaves deeper echoes. When the fear was overwhelming, when the support was absent, the brain may encode the memory differently. The amygdala stays hypervigilant. The hippocampus may struggle to place the memory in time. The fear becomes ever present, even in safe moments. This is not weakness. This is survival stretched too far, and healing this kind of fear takes time. It begins with safety, with repetition, with signals sent again and again to the brain. You're safe now. This is not then. Each small calm moment becomes a thread. Over time, those threads form a net strong enough to hold the fear, to name it, to understand it. Because fear, when listened to kindly, becomes something else. It becomes information. It shows you what matters, what hurts, what needs healing. The brain does not ask you to banish fear. It asks you to meet it with care. And in that meeting, in the breath that stays steady, in the thought that says this will pass, in the heart that softens, something shifts. The echo begins to fade. The brain still remembers, but now it remembers strength too. Let's move further now into the quiet spaces where fear does more than warn, where it shapes who we become. Because fear, while uncomfortable, is not always the enemy. It is a teacher, a signal, a form of care dressed in urgency. The brain doesn't send fear to punish you. It sends fear to prepare you, to help you respond, to survive what it has sensed before. Over time, though, this preparation becomes pattern. If fear returns too often, or if the brain never gets a clear sign that the danger has passed, the neural circuits begin to change. The amygdala becomes more sensitive. It sounds the alarm more easily, more loudly. The hippocampus, which helps place experiences in context, begins to overgeneralize. Not just that moment, but all moments like it become marked with warning. And the prefrontal cortex, which helps with regulation, may step back under stress, silenced by the emotional weight. This is why anxiety forms, not out of nothing, but out of a history the brain cannot forget. You might not know exactly what you're afraid of, but your nervous system does. It remembers what danger felt like, and it signals, again and again, something is wrong, even when you cannot name what. In these moments, the body joins the chorus. The sympathetic nervous system shifts the body into vigilance. Shallow breaths, racing heart, tense muscles. You may feel restless, alert, unsettled. You may feel as though something is about to happen, even in a quiet room. This is fear, without a place to land. But this does not mean you are broken. It means your brain has been paying attention. It has stored experiences deeply. It has been trying to protect you, and in that effort, it has sometimes overreached. The system is not failing, it is overworking. Even so, the brain can relearn. This is the gift of neuroplasticity, the ability for pathways to change, and relearning begins with safety. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind, and steady routines, supportive connection, moments where the heart is allowed to slow. When the amygdala senses calm and the prefrontal cortex is re-engaged, the pattern begins to shift. One of the most powerful tools in this process is breath. When you breathe slowly, especially on the exhale, the vagus nerve sends a signal to the brainstem. Relax. This signal travels upward. It calms the hypothalamus. It lowers cortisol. And the brain, receiving these signs, starts to believe, we are not in danger. And when that happens often enough, with breathing, with stillness, with connection, the amygdala changes. Studies have shown that meditation, mindfulness, and trauma-informed therapies can reduce its volume and reactivity. the brain's alarm system becomes more balanced. It learns to wait, to ask, to check in before assuming threat. And so the echo of fear can soften. The same signal that once caused panic can become a whisper. The heart still flutters, but it does not race. The breath still shortens, but returns more quickly. This is healing. Not the absence of fear, but the return of choice in the face of it. The prefrontal cortex, once silenced under fear, becomes stronger with use. Each time you pause before reacting, each time you name your feeling, each time you breathe through the surge, it grows, it learns, it sends calm back through the system. It becomes a partner to the emotional brain, not its opponent. And in this partnership, understanding grows. You begin to see fear not as a sign of failure, but as a sign of sensitivity. You're alert, not weak. You're aware, not broken. The brain has been listening carefully. Now it is learning how to respond gently. Even the insula, the bridge between sensation and emotion, becomes more refined. You start to tell the difference between fear and excitement, between tension and intuition. You learn to ask, what is this feeling really saying? And over time, your response becomes less reactive, more curious. You turn toward the feeling instead of away. Memory also changes. Fear-based memories, once sharp and overwhelming, become more nuanced. The hippocampus learns to file them in the right place. You can remember without reliving. You can feel the edge without falling in. This is not forgetting, it is reframing. It is the brain learning to say, that was then, this is now. And this now becomes more accessible. You begin to notice the moments when you're safe, when your breath is calm, when the day is quiet. The default mode of your nervous system starts to shift, from constant watchfulness to openness. The world begins to feel less like a threat, more like a space to move gently through. Fear does not disappear. It still visits, but now it has a seat at the table. It speaks, but it does not shout. It reminds you to pause, but not to hide. And in this new rhythm, life becomes softer. You respond to fear not with urgency, but with awareness. And sometimes fear carries wisdom. It tells you when something is not right. It warns you when your values are being crossed. It nudges you toward protection. But even then, the brain no longer lets fear lead alone. It listens and then asks, is this signal old or new? Is this fear from now or from before? And in that question, there is power. Because fear, like any emotion, is not the enemy. It is a message. And when the brain learns to hear it clearly, the message becomes lighter. It becomes part of your awareness, not all of it. And so the echo of fear remains, not to haunt you, but to help you move more wisely, to remind you of what matters, to show you where healing still lives. And in that reminder, the brain grows not just smarter, but kinder, not just alert, but alive. Let us now bring this echo to a softer place, not silenced, but held. Because fear does not ask to be erased, it asks to be understood. It asks the brain to pause, to breathe, to listen. And in that listening, something inside begins to change, not all at once, but gently, like light returning at the edge of night. In the final stage of fear's journey, the brain no longer treats it as an invader. It begins to see it as a signal woven into the fabric of living. The prefrontal cortex, having practiced the art of reflection, learns to stay steady even when fear rises, does not stop the feeling, welcomes it with calm. It says, you are part of me, but you do not define me. This shift changes everything. When fear is no longer resisted, it loses its grip. The body still reacts, the heart quickens, the breath shortens, but the mind no longer spirals. The insula reads the signals clearly. It knows this is fear and not danger, and in knowing that, it makes space. And in that space, the anterior cingulate cortex begins to create emotional flexibility, the ability to move from fear to focus, from tension to compassion. This is not denial, it is resilience. It is the learned rhythm of recovery. Because fear never asked for permanence. It was only ever meant to pass. To rise, to speak, to be heard, the reason it lingers is not because it wants to stay, but because the brain sometimes forgets to let it move through. But now, you know how. You know that naming the fear activates the language centers, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, and sends soothing signals back to the limbic system. You know that slow, intentional breath sends waves of calm through the vagus nerve, reducing the flood of cortisol. You know that grounding in the present, feeling your feet, your breath, your skin, returns the mind from imagined futures to the safety of now. And in this practice, the brain rewires. It learns that fear is not an emergency. It is a call for awareness, for care, for presence. The default mode network, often the seat of rumination and worry, begins to soften. It stops spinning old stories and starts sensing new ones. The fear memory that once looped without end becomes part of a fuller narrative. Not just what hurt, but how you healed. Not just what happened, but who you became because of it. And as the brain changes, so does the body. The parasympathetic nervous system reclaims its rhythm. Heart rate steadies, digestion improves, sleep returns. The muscles no longer brace with every unknown. The body begins to believe in safety again. Because you want to protect something, your safety, your heart, your hope, and that is not a flaw. It is a form of love. Even in moments of deep uncertainty, the brain can return to this truth. That fear, while loud, is not all of you, that beneath it is the capacity for choice, for stillness, for trust. And so, when fear next appears, as a whisper in the night, a tightening in the chest, a worry that rises without warning, pause. Listen. Let your brain say, yes, I hear you, and I am here with you. Then breathe. Let the signals shift. Let the mind steady. Let the body soften. Because fear is not the end of the story. It is one voice in the chorus, and when it is heard with kindness, it begins to sing differently. It begins to remind you not of what could go wrong, but of all you have survived, of the strength you carry, of the peace that always waits beneath the storm. The echo of fear then becomes something more. It becomes a guide, a reminder that you are alive, alert, growing. That your brain, far from broken, is doing what it was built to do: learn, adapt, care. And when it learns that it is safe, that it is supported, that it is loved, the echo fades. The storm still visits, but the sky clears faster. The light returns sooner. And in that light you remember who you are. Not the fear, but the listener. Not the storm, but the stillness beneath. Not the signal, but the soul it was trying to protect all along.